Hey, everyone, and welcome back to episode 6 of the Developers Unplugged podcast. Rob, thank you very much for joining me. Very special guest today.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you having me. It's awesome.
No, it's great to be here with you, obviously. And yeah, I know we've actually known each other for quite a while. I think it's probably coming up to like just over a year that we've actually known each other. But yeah, obviously you're a great guy. I've wanted you on the podcast ever since I've made the podcast back in January as well. So I'm really excited for this. So I guess, Rob, obviously you're a solutions architect. You've got decades of experience in tech and just so many different companies and organizations that you've been a part of, which is I think just really quite interesting, especially for people maybe just starting off in engineering as well. I guess in a whole, like, could you give us a bit of a background maybe for someone who doesn't know you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I started, I graduated university in '96. So back then the World Wide Web was just getting started and started out on some really minor websites. Mostly on the design side. So I had a graphic design background, but I also worked with animation a bit. And so you had to have some programming behind there. And then as the internet evolved, I went, more and more away from design and more into programming. And then I got my master's degree in computer information systems, and then went full tilt into the computer science. And so, yeah, I've worked at several different companies, and then I got into consulting in the US and really loved it. It was a bit tough because they like to blame the contractor, when something goes wrong. So you have to kind of have a thick skin to be in that industry. But I met a lot of really great people, and we worked on some really great things. And then I moved over to Germany and Berlin from the States, and then started working with another consulting company in the banking industry, in their banking division, and then did that for a few years, and then decided to go back to the corporate life, and now I'm back working for a small startup, as you know. So.
Yeah, definitely. So what a journey as well, by the way. And thanks for a bit of the summary there. I think one thing that I want to ask like straight away, because I work in the Berlin market and sometimes outside of Berlin, but always within Germany. And it seems to me that there's a massive like Western presence, especially in tech, like massive Western presence, both North America and South America, which is really interesting to me because I always kind of thought of North America to be just the States as a whole to be probably the hub for a dev to go, like an engineer to be, like if I was a software engineer, I'd probably be like, oh, Silicon Valley, right? Like where all the giant tech companies are. But there's, like I say, such a presence and such a community of people from the West that have come over to Berlin and started their career in tech. Why do you think that is? And also, just to follow up on that question as well, why did you do that as well? What was the story there?
Yeah, when I first moved to Berlin, everyone was asking me, they're like, why did you come here? Like you were in Silicon Valley. Why did you come to Berlin? It's the other way around. But as I've been in Berlin, like you said, there's a ton of other US folks that I've run into quite a bit in Berlin, especially. I think it's, the grass is greener on the other side. There's two different kind of worlds in tech. So when you're in the US, as you know, the salaries are quite a bit higher. But along with that, the risks are higher. So you have to save money for layoffs and, these sort of different things that kind of hit you from time to time. And then the live work balance is a little bit different. So in the US, you really need to, if you want to build your career, you have to put in the time, and that can be some late nights. And some vacations that you have to schedule around your company's schedule. And that was kind of one of my considerations, was the live work balance in Europe is a bit better. So that's where I wanted to try it. I also wanted the challenge as a consultant, I was in a lot of different subject matter areas. And just the challenge of the European market, I thought was going to be a lot of fun and interesting, and so I wanted to give it a shot. So I think that's it. I think for me, from my experience in talking to people, that's why they kind of pick Europe is, there's a live work balance. If you really want to travel, it's a good place to go, especially for an American. And for the people that are here that go to the US, they want to have the American experience, the US experience, and then also that be in the hub of things, because that was the nice thing about living in San Francisco. Like all the conferences are there. It's really easy to get out, and if you want to just take off for the afternoon and hop into a conference, you usually know someone that can get you in, or your company will pay you the fee to get you in, so yeah, it's a great learning experience. So I love both worlds, but I am loving traveling around Europe and stuff like outside of work time is really awesome. So
and you mentioned it earlier, like it's a classic case as well, I think, of the grass is always greener. Like it's obviously a very common saying as such, but it's such a classic case of that, because like I say, on paper, you look at like if you are a software engineer, for example, where I am in London, if you're a software engineer in London, obviously there's some great opportunities here, but like you're going to be looking at some of the real giants like Meta and Google. Like I could bore you guys obviously with the names as such, but they're all seeming to be in just one location specifically, and it's all in the States. And it's so interesting, like I say, hearing that you're saying that, and that obviously you've actually physically moved away from that in terms of a career. And you mentioned obviously that there's actually some quite obvious risks in the States when it comes to your career. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? You mentioned like layoffs. Is that just something that's quite common in terms of the culture over there, just to be be off as such? Because it's not as common over here, right?
Yeah. It's. I mean, in my experience, it's been pretty common. I think I've been laid off probably 4 or 5 times for reduction in force. So yeah, it does seem to happen quite often there, quite a bit more often. And the safety net under that is not as strong as it is in Europe. So that's why, I mean, you have the good salary, so you have to make sure to save up enough money to handle when that happens. And then there's a little bit, it's kind of funny because also coming to the German side, like there's a big cultural difference. Like on the German side, if you're doing great, no one says anything, but in the US, if you're doing great, everyone tells you how good you're doing and everything. So when I came over and no one's saying any feedback on my position, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get laid off because this is, kind of what happens, so you kind of start seeing these warning things like that I'm used to from the US in that market that just isn't here, which is kind of nice. But yeah, I mean, it depends on the company you work for. If you're working for these giants, I think if you're working for these giants, you might be a little more susceptible for layoffs, depending, on what your position is. But yeah, you just have to be prepared for that and just know that if you're getting this good salary, to be prudent and save a little bit in case that does happen. But yeah,
that's crazy. Is that like, because like I said, this is actually the first time really that I've heard that, because obviously I've never worked the US market. I don't know really anybody from the States. Is that a common mindset to have that? Do people just like almost talk about it so openly, like, oh yeah, I'm putting like, like on payday where people put away like 500 euros for an emergency fund or 1,000 euros for an emergency fund, and then X amount towards a holiday. In the States, do people put like money away for like backup as such? Is it like a separate thing? Is it like something that people actually speak about actively? Is it that common?
Yeah, I don't know if it's not necessarily just for layoffs, but I do know that, yeah, for sure. Like, I think their guidances have 3 months, 3 months savings to be able to handle that. But I mean, it's a little different also in the way hiring happens there and firing, because it's like Germany is a 3-month notice period, and in the US it's 2 weeks, and it's a customary thing. It's not by contract like Germany. So so it's easier if you lose your job. It's usually, it's a lot faster, the hiring process. So it's much more compressed than what it is in Germany, from what I've noticed. So so yeah, so it does go faster there. But yeah, definitely, I do think yeah, people do save a little bit more for that rainy day, just in case that job isn't there. And yeah,
it's crazy. It's crazy. And smart, of course, smart, but also quite sad if you think about it. Like, it's become like layoffs are never, they're never a good thing. They damage so many people's, mental well-being, and there's so many things. Obviously, you've experienced it. You mentioned 4 or 5 times in your career, which is insane. I know how talented you are, how great of a guy you are. So for you to be laid off 4 or 5 times, it must just be such a common, such a normal thing. So it's such a shame that it's kind of like normalized as such. And you mentioned also, obviously, one of the big things that you was kind of feeling over when you come over to Germany from the States was actually the fact that there was no compliments all of the time, no praises.
Yeah.
Do you think it's very like, from a comparison point of view, do you think it's very reactionary in the States in the sense of like how they think of people? Like, you could have a very good week and like maybe overachieve in certain things, and then the next week maybe it's not as good as that, but you're still overachieving, but it's just slightly less, and then maybe you're like almost treated differently. It's actually always like an unrealistic expectation to continuously keep pushing in the States.
Yeah, I think it really kind of depends on your manager. Because I've had some really good managers where, it's pretty realistic and everything, but then I mean, that's how things change. Sometimes you can get a manager that's really tough, and maybe they don't have the experience. So, you're really putting out a lot, and then the next week you're having an off week, and maybe you're still overachieving in your mind, but yeah. So and the metrics, some of the metrics, it just depends on your company how they have their metrics structured. So the metric might not really reflect the work you're doing. And that's really frustrating. So yeah.
I think having a great manager is such an important thing anywhere, right? In any job you do, it doesn't matter if it's in tech, it doesn't matter if it's in sales. Having a great manager will like make or break you in terms of like your longevity at that company, in my opinion. Obviously, having a great team and so many other things are very important, of course, but having a manager that supports you is so important. Just going back, and this isn't, by the way, a podcast designed to compare America and Germany, but we've naturally kind of flowed on this, and we just one last comparison, which I think is really quite interesting. America, you mentioned, obviously they have like a 2-week leaving notice, but even then it's almost like a gentleman's agreement. You don't have to oblige by it. I've actually heard stories of people more or less after like 3 or 4 years leaving on Friday and starting a new job on the Monday, like in America. That is obviously in Germany and in Europe as a whole. In London, we don't have 3 months. I believe we have 1 month. I probably should know that, but I work the German market, so I don't actually know that, to be fair. But obviously in Germany, typically a standard is 3 months. Sometimes even in certain levels, it's 6 months, which is interesting. Why is that? Do you think that there is such a gap there? Why? And what is your opinions also, by the way, on the German standard of 3 months leaving notice? Because it's controversial.
Right. Yeah, I don't know why. I've been used to it from the US, and it's but yeah, I mean, what I find interesting with the German standard with the 3 months, like in the US, if you're really upset at your job, then you're just like, I could just leave and be out tomorrow, and a lot of people do burn bridges like on their last day, unfortunately. But in Germany, you give your 3-month notice, and if things aren't going well, if you're not liking your job, you have to put up with it for 3 months, and you've got to work with people for 3 months. You've got your colleagues, so you really do try to make an effort, I feel, to stay positive and try to keep it up, because that's a long leave period. But it is really hard.
It's really hard. And it's obviously a long time as well. And do you think it's beneficial for somebody to stay at a company for such a long time after they've resigned? Like 3 months is a very long time. Do you think that can be damaging for a culture?
It can be. I mean, if it's negative, I think it could be. If the person's really negative, I think it could be bad for a team. I think that's where the garden leave really takes place, takes effect, and maybe they let people go on garden leave and pay them for the rest of the 3 months. I think that's good. From a worker standpoint, I feel more secure with the 3-month leave, because it's on the other side also, and in the States, I would see certain things happening, like if you see like your results are off as a company for a quarter, and then you get the kind of feeling that they're going to reduce staff, you get a little nervous. But here, if the results are off for a quarter, you can kind of wait and see what happens, and you don't get as nervous or insecure with your job. So that part of it's nice, and I I've noticed the competition hasn't been so, like I noticed in the US, there's like with this, with the layoff culture that can happen at certain companies, the competition is really, really tight. So if you go on vacation, you know, your colleagues might try to outshine you while you're on vacation. And I don't see that happening as much here. Like I don't, you know, which is kind of nice. So yeah.
There's just very interesting comparisons, like I say, really interesting. I think that's why we've kind of, I've really diverted into this just because it's really interesting. And like I say, going back to where you are now, so you're currently working as a solution architect in Berlin, right? And
yes.
when you was in the States, and then you was like, right, I'm going to go to Europe. There's some amazing places here. There's, you know, London, there's Paris, there's Italy. Europe's amazing, obviously, for traveling. And you mentioned as well, obviously, especially if you're grown up in the States, it's quite a long way away to just keep doing that. So it's actually really great that they're all so close together. Why Berlin specifically?
Yeah, I mean, Berlin has quite a nice startup culture to it. And I do like the way Germans approach engineering. I mean, there's like the way they practice it. I really like the process behind it, and that was attractive to me. So, and just seeing the Berlin startup scene was really a lot like San Francisco was when I first moved there. With it, you know, and San Francisco changed a bit. I mean, San Francisco still has a ton of startups, but they also have like the Meta and Google and everything like that, the big ones. But yeah, it's just kind of fun. Berlin, being kind of edgy and startup, you know, in the startup world, and we have also a lot of good meetups and everything going on. So I think that's the culture is really great. Yeah,
it's unique, is what I say. It's like, because my colleagues, you know, they work in different markets, maybe Switzerland, maybe they work in the UK market, and as you know, obviously we've met in person. We've had a drink together in person as well, which has been great. And I visit Berlin, you know, quite often as well, as much as I probably can, sort of thing. And they always ask, like, what's the culture? You know, what's it like? What's Berlin? And I can't compare it to anything. Like, Berlin is Berlin. That's all I say. It's just like Berlin for me. It's not Germany, of course. You know, it's in Germany and it's the capital, but it's like it's just its own thing. There's no comparison. There's no city that's familiar with it. And I think for a lot of people, they will either thrive in that environment and they'll love it and it will be amazing, or some people really just won't like it. You know, it's an acquired taste. But again, like I say, from more of a Western point of view, actually it seems to be a place where people can really thrive, which is really interesting. But yeah, okay, cool. So I guess in terms of yourself then, like I say, you're a solutions architect now, and you've obviously had so many years of experience. I won't say the number, of course, but you've definitely had a great deal of experience working in all different engineering teams. Obviously, in those teams as well, there's some clear high performers. And for me, this is always really an interesting thing because, like I say, you've been part of so many diverse teams, so many different sizes, now being part of a startup as well. And there's always these like high performers that completely change the game. You know, they'll come in within a week and they'll just change everything for the positive. And it was just, you know, it will spark something really special and drive the team into doing something, you know, amazing. Because obviously these people are not around very often. And I think the aim of hiring, and also my job as well, is to find these people, and they're not, you know, clearly out there. I would say you were personally one of these people, by the way. But what kind of common characteristics, because of course you've interviewed loads of engineers before in your time, maybe been responsible for building entire engineering teams. What do you feel is like the most common characteristic amongst the high performing engineers out there? Because sometimes they're quite hard to spot in an interview process, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. Yeah. I mean, because you know, a lot of people are looking for the really outgoing, outspoken engineers, and I've had some really good engineers that I've worked with that were really quiet, and then I've had the really outspoken engineers as well. And the quiet ones seem to get overlooked quite a bit. But you know what I see that really kind of sets them apart is that you know, they have a quest to learn something new, and that's really important with developers. And they aren't afraid to take certain risks, and they aren't afraid to, I mean, they communicate well also. So, and they're transparent. So if they're taking risks, they're transparent with the team about it. And then we seem to thrive because we're kind of pushing the edge a bit, but we're aware of what's happening. We're aware of what the downside could be, and we can react with it. But I think, for developers that are really thriving, I think the soft skills and the willingness to learn are the top things. So, if they can communicate well, and they're open, and they can build trust with the team. I think building trust with your team is really, really important. I've seen some really, really smart developers that are really secretive, and it's really hard to work with them. So I think the soft skills are really important to work on. Yeah,
definitely. And I completely agree with that as well, by the way. It's not just technical, you need to work often in a team. Engineering, I think a lot of the times, again, a common misconception is that software developers, they just in a room underneath a house in someone's attic, whatever it is, and they're just have got a computer and they just code all day. It's like, no, actually there's a lot of collaboration. A lot of times people want people in the office as well. Companies want people in the office. And that is so important to have strong communication, to maybe not exactly be outgoing, because some people can be introverted. Naturally, myself, I'm actually quite introverted as well. But having clear communication is definitely something that's really important. But one thing I've seen from a lot of companies that they kind of get this wrong is an interview process. So it's all good, of course, having a great brand name. Maybe it's, an interesting product that you've got. Everything's great. And then they kind of fall at the interview process. And I guess it's always something that will always split opinions. But what do you feel, and this is a difficult question to answer really, Rob, so I'm sorry about this. What do you feel would be the most effective interview process in terms of really identifying these true A players when it comes to software development? Because like I say, sometimes they're actually hidden in disguise almost, right? And it's only until there's a certain task that you do, or there's a certain thing that, maybe a certain question or topic that you can discuss, and it really kind of brings it out of them. What would be the sort of go-to interview process maybe for you to identify these people?
Yeah, so I think what really works well for me when I'm interviewing someone is I have to be really receptive to the way they communicate and the way they problem solve. So I know some people, I can fire off questions about, different what is dependency injection, what is blah, 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 and fire off these terms. But for some other people, the terms, they might not remember the terms, but they know the principle behind the terms. So if they're having trouble with this, then, maybe phrasing your questions a bit different and asking them to solve a problem, posing a problem for them to solve, and then, really listening and having a discussion about it a little more than just a list of questions that you're going to ask about their technical abilities. I think, there's a lot of good developers that get skipped over because they don't answer these, scripts as well as you expect. But when you actually talk to them about solving a problem, they're really good. So yeah, that's kind of, I think you have to be a little bit flexible when you interview people, and that's my advice, I guess.
I think also, not treating someone as the rest of the 100 people that you've interviewed previously. There's a saying, I'm probably going to get it wrong here, but it's something to judge. You should never judge, something like you wouldn't judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree. That's not its speciality, but actually you probably put it in water, you're going to be really impressed. So it's trying to find these areas, in which people can basically play on their strengths, because everyone's completely different, everyone's completely unique. But I completely agree on that 100%. And I wanted to go back to you now, Rob, in terms of yourself. Like I say, you've been in tech for such a long time, and it's so great to see that you've still got that spark. Like I said, we know each other very well, and every time I speak to you, you're always really enthusiastic and really happy and always excited about what's happening in your work and your day to day. How do you keep that? How do you keep that kind of going? Because I've spoken to engineers who are sort of 4 or 5 years in, coming up to more sort of senior level, and they kind of just start to get a little bit complacent, I guess, a little bit bored as such. How have you kept the enthusiasm going?
Yeah, I mean, For me, it's kind of easy just because I do really like new technology. I like to see, what's coming out. And as a solution architect, that's everything. I mean, it's I'm looking at what the next new thing is and trying to find out if it's hype or if it's real. And then there's a lot of collaboration. So I really like working with people. So, I learned from people. I feel like I can help teach some, more junior people. So that's really just working with people, understanding what the new technologies is. People have really creative ways of using new technology in solutions that I wouldn't have thought of. And so that really drives me, I think, is just seeing what's new, how we can use it maybe in a new way to solve an old problem. And that keeps me going. Yeah. And I think just like working with people, I think just assuming best intent. So I don't really, and knowing that there's many different ways to solve a problem and not getting too frustrated when people have a different way than I want to go. It's fun to watch that sometimes. And if you can let that go, I think you'll be pretty successful and happy in your work.
Yeah. I think it's hard to not be bored in tech because of how ever changing it is. Like 3 or 4 years ago, artificial intelligence, be it was around, a lot of people don't realize that, but actually artificial intelligence, it wasn't mainstream. People weren't really affected by it. Nobody spoke about it in the mainstream as such. And within 18 months, AI is something that we all actively are now using, really. It seems so, and it's only ever going to change that way. And I know that you mentioned as well about like, it's really interesting for you as well to see like emerging techs. And I think also identifying like which is hype and which isn't. Which for you at the moment is hype and which is not as such when it comes to maybe like emerging technologies?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's good. I mean, you mentioned AI, and I think there's some portions of AI that are really hype, and maybe we're putting a little bit too much into it. But then there's some portions, of AI that are really super useful and I think have a lot of promise. I think the same thing can be said with like blockchain and Bitcoin. I remember that being really hyped up, like probably 10 years ago, I believe, when everyone was talking about blockchain and everyone was thinking, oh, we can do this application and have a blockchain behind it and everything, and then it just never panned out really for a lot of the applications. I mean, those are kind of the two on the top of my head, but I mean, AI really isn't hype. It's, I think certain applications of AI might be hype, but yeah, I don't know. I think, there's some, like maybe some of the JavaScript libraries for a while there were, it seemed like every week there was a new JavaScript library that was super hot. So I'm kind of glad it's settled down to the, the 3 or 4, major ones. But yeah, it was, as a developer, it was really frustrating because it felt like I was, constantly learning a new library or framework. As
somebody who works with developers, so I don't program. Obviously, I'm a tech recruiter. I work with software engineers. That is also really tough for me as well, because I'll be talking to a software engineer. Obviously, it's my job to know exactly what is in the market at the moment, what people are using. And oh my God, the amount of times that I'll talk to an engineer, I mean, it's slowed down. You're absolutely right. It's slowed down a lot, which is great. And there's only like 3 or 4 now main ones. There's always the occasional one with like .js in the end of it. And I'm always like, what is that? But it's simply like every week I'll be talking to a software developer like last year, and I'll be like, I'm really sorry, I don't know what that framework is, So I'm glad that that's massively slowed down. I want to go back to how you spoke about AI. A lot of it, I do think, so I was about to say a lot of it is hype. I don't think a lot of it is hype because it's very real and it's actually going to be something that I personally believe will change the world. AI, I do still think that, bold statement, of course, but I still think it will be massive. And it is massive. Because a lot of people, I think, because they kind of go straight into like doomsday, they go into, they immediately talk about negatives. As we know, unfortunately, the news, the media, they like to spread sort of negative news because it does spread faster. So that's what they report on and they focus on more. You mentioned about the positives about AI. What do you think the positives of artificial intelligence would be, maybe now and also for the future? Because I think a lot of people maybe don't talk about this as well.
Yeah, I mean, personally, AI gives me a jump on what I'm working on for like solution architecture. There's a lot of I mean, before you'd go to Google and then you dig around forever, but AI really, if you structure your prompts well, you get a lot of information without having to do too much searching that you can go. I always have to, I use it kind of as a starting place, a place to jump off from, and then go into like some of the more credible sources, that you can find. So I find it really, really super helpful in that. And then also like using, tools like Copilot, are excellent. Like, for example, I'm writing some stuff against Keycloak's REST API, and, Copilot knows the API, it knows the interface, and
wow.
I just type in a word and it already knows what I'm trying to do. And I think I've saved hours, and it's amazing. It's really great, but you have to know how to tell when something's off on the results and stuff. So you just can't take it and run. You have to kind of make sure and validate right now, but it's still way ahead of what I would find if I had tried to Google or,
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely. And I think that it's something that, I think a lot of people think, for example, like AGI. Have you heard of AGI before? Elon Musk just recently reported on AGI, artificial general intelligence. That's something that's, for me, quite terrifying. But, for a lot of people, I think, who maybe aren't in tech, they look at AI and go, whoa, what the hell? Let's not use that. That's really, that's terrifying. That's, not ideal. But yeah, I think that AGI is probably something that for a lot of people that aren't in tech, often they maybe reject. I think AI as well is definitely something that people reject, but actually there's a lot of benefits towards it as well. It's just something that I think is going to need to be massively managed, because it can get out of control really quickly. I think it kind of has a little bit in like the 18 months that it's become mainstream. I don't know if you want to maybe agree on that as well, because I've definitely seen that. I mean, it's really kind of got out of control in certain areas, but I think it's just about maintaining it. I think also understanding exactly like the power of that as well.
Right.
I wanted to just talk one of the last topics as well, by the way, because AI is something that I think software developers should personally embrace, but sometimes they are actually scared of AI because of it basically taking over their job. And just recently, have you heard of Devin AI? Did you see?
No, I haven't. No. Is this the video one, or is this something else?
I believe that Devin AI, don't quote me on this as well. I need to still do a little bit of background research into it, but I believe that it writes code and creates basically websites entirely by itself. Yeah, there was a bit of a joke where it was kind of saying like, I think software engineers are safe at the moment because the company that made Devin AI is now hiring software engineers. So it's not exactly Devin AI is doing all of these things, but I think that that's just the start. But I guess what kind of impact do you think that AI will have on software development as a whole? And also one of the things that maybe is a bit of a talking point as well, do you think that junior engineers are maybe going to become less important as such for companies looking to maybe cut costs, which is a bit of a sad thing to say, really, because they've got to start somewhere? Do you think that? Do you think it will basically negatively impact, software developers' development?
I think it'll change it. So I have an interesting perspective about that, because my degree in '96 was graphic design, and that industry went. I mean, who's getting pamphlets anymore? I think you maybe see a pamphlet at your doctor's office, or, so that industry went totally digital. Like typesetters, that was a thing. I remember we'd take stuff to a typesetter and you get the stuff back. And now with desktop publishing, that whole industry went away. So I think, for the junior developers, they might not be wasting time like setting up some of these menial tasks and doing some of the menial tasks that they were used to, but that they're doing now. But I think it'll change a bit, and maybe they'll they'll work on something different. I don't know what that looks like, but we'll spend a lot of time writing boilerplate, stuff that we have the junior developers write boilerplate on, or they, work on some QA stuff or something, or, some of these tasks. I think that'll change, and maybe their work will be a little bit more interesting and effective, and then leave the senior developers to work on something a little different. But I think it's asking a lot for, I mean, just from being years in website development, back in the time, and applications now, and talking to clients and the way they change things and stuff. I don't think AI is going to quite replace, being able to develop an app. I don't think it'll quite get to that. So I think there'll be, hopefully, humans involved in that process. And,
hopefully.
Yeah. And then when it gets to that point, maybe we don't have to work anymore and we're all going to be on vacation. But
can you imagine?
Yeah.
Nice. Well, look, Rob, that was, I think, where we kind of want to end it as such. So I just want to say thank you so much, because it's so nice, like such an insight from you. Again, like I say, talking about the comparison between like the States and also now coming to Berlin, like what a story that is, I think, for you as well. Thank you so much for coming on to episode 6 of the Developers Unplugged podcast.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. It was great chatting with you.
Thanks, Rob.